And I'll let it get going. There we are. Yep, we're there. Okay. Yes, we're online now. We are live now. Okay. It is now 1:59 p.m., at least in the middle of the US. So welcome everyone to Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions on this Wednesday, the 19th of October in the year 2022. Our topic today is busting the myth about empathy. I have been talking about this on my podcast all year long because this one came up for me about the same time last year, or at least in February. And I said, I need to do something on busting this myth because it's I think me and my panelists will agree, this is one of those that irritates us to no end for its various reasons. My name is Philip King Lowe. I am the owner, producer, and host for today's Autistic Moment, a podcast for autistic adults by an autistic adult, and that would be me. Autistic Voices Roundtable Discussions is an addition to the podcast so that the voices of autistic individuals can be heard regarding the topics that are often had about us. When it comes to conversations about things such as the myth that autistics don't have empathy, the voices that are least paid attention to are those of autistic individuals. And so Autistic Voices Roundtable Discussions is one way that I hope we can begin to change that. There's always more work to do, but beginning a change is at least the beginning of a change. This Autistic Voices Roundtable discussion is sponsored by Minnesota Independence College and Community, Looking Forward Life Coaching, Task Thoughts LLC, and I want to thank all of my sponsors, these sponsors, for helping to make this program possible. One of the more common statements that I have heard with regards to autistics and empathy is that autistics experience empathy very much like the Vulcans do on Star Trek. The implication is that we experience empathy logically, but not emotionally. In addition, it suggests that if we do experience empathy, it is because we tend to suppress our emotions under the weight of all the baggage that comes with the stigmas about being autistic. That is why we appear to not be experiencing any empathy. However that statement was meant, I interpret it as saying that we do not experience empathy in the way that the neuromajority does, and therefore we probably do not experience any. I have had others who have said, quote, "You lack empathy." The topic of this roundtable discussion is busting the myth about empathy, because there are many of us autistics that experience what we call double empathy in one way or another. So that is why we're having this discussion today. And the panelists that are here are Anna Aragon. Did I say that last name right?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. And then Nicola Whiting and Dr.
Hi.
Scott Farsard. And
hello.
Hello, Robert Allen Klaus III. I want to thank you all for being here with us today to talk about this particular topic. So let's begin. The first thing I would want to ask each of our panelists to do is to perhaps give us one example of an event in your life during which you experienced some kind of empathy. You might want to tell us about the context of the empathy and how you dealt with that empathy. And so now I'm going to let it go to our panelists to go ahead and maybe give us some examples of empathy, of how you experienced it. What was it like for you, and how did you manage for yourself? So let's go in the order of those who. Let's start with Nicola and end with Scott. Let's do it that way. Go ahead.
Well, straight into showing your underskirts. So for me, I would say that I experience a different empathy in a different way to most of my peers. So a lot of the empathy that or what they describe as empathy is more an identification of what somebody else is feeling, which is not necessarily a strong point for me, as I don't recognize a lot of micro expressions and things like that. So for me, it's more the kind of deeper experience of really thinking about how something might impact somebody, and that is often, I think, at a deeper level, because everything's so connected in how most of us think. So it's not just, oh, your grandmother died. It's, oh, your grandmother died, and now you're going to be looking after your grandfather, and you've got to do all of that and all of the extra layers, and suddenly you can become quite overwhelmed and have a disproportionate response that you're trying to control because you don't want somebody to think it's about you. So I can remember a colleague at work said literally their grandmother had died, and I felt immediately overwhelmed because all of the connectedness came in, and I wanted to cry but knew that wouldn't be appropriate, and just barely held it in and just said, I'm so terribly sorry to hear that. And they looked at me as if to say, wow, you must be really, thank you so much. And I had to leave because otherwise I would have burst into quite excessive tears. So I think sometimes we actually have the opposite. We may appear as not superficially empathic, because if we allow ourselves to really experience at the depth that we often do, we wouldn't be able to function. Like I had to go away, and then that just stopped me from doing the things that the average person might do. So I think that would be an example. And just before we came on, I know, Philip, you mentioned the Queen's death. I didn't watch the funeral apart from the very last bit, because I couldn't cope with watching the media look at people's faces as they mourned. I just felt that was not a kind thing to do, because every time I walked past the TV, it was just like focused on their mourning faces, and I just felt I couldn't imagine being in a situation where I'd lost my mother and have a camera in my face. I just made me immensely just huge feelings that King Charles now had to go through that experience so publicly. And I think that's the sort of empathy that I would have, is not choosing to be one of the people watching that out of respect for his feelings, if that makes sense, and then mourning about that separately.
Okay, thank you. I would like to just add, to me, that is an example of some empathy that someone else might not experience. So there's a great example of how we might experience an empathy in a way that someone might not. And we even think of something like that. All right, Anna, go ahead.
Sure. So, well, in my life, it's a funny one as well, because besides being autistic myself, what I do for a living is work with other autistic people and help them through a lot of these feelings as well. Because I work as an autism specialist and mentor. So I feel every day so much empathy for all of these people that I work with. And I live their life with them and I feel their pains, and that's something we both work through. And I relate to a lot of what Nicola was saying, because it has to do with connection. That's what we're doing there. That's why this type of work is important, because that type of connection is what matters in the end. That's what we want as humans, is to feel connected, to have those emotions. It's just that as autistic people, sometimes they feel so intense. And that's the thing with being autistic, is that we do work on those extremes. So we can choose to appear like we don't feel empathy at all, or we can choose to just full on embrace it and have all of those feelings, but they do overwhelm us a lot of the time. So it's learning to work with that extreme, learning to feel your feelings in ways that work for you, like Nicola, that decided to only watch the end of the funeral, for example. So for me, I feel a lot of empathy while helping other people work through their empathy feelings, which is fun. And yeah, I quite enjoy what I do for a living because of that.
Yeah, and just because you said that, I feel the need that this is a good time for me to show this image that I found on I found here.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yes, I feel so deeply that often my emotions overwhelm me. I can take on the feelings of others so intensely it exhausts me.
Exactly.
I know it. I know that for myself, very much so. Yeah.
So, and as a teenager, I used to choose to look like I didn't feel anything. People used to describe me as like sort of a robot, because that was easier at the time. I didn't know how to deal with those emotions. So I chose not to show them at all, which was a lot of masking as well. And nowadays, I just learned to deal with them and show them in ways that make me feel comfortable as well. So yeah, I think it's about working through those, and it takes time, it takes work, and sometimes it takes a lot of support and help and connection.
Yeah, I think that's good. Thank you. Robert, go ahead.
Well, I thought about various cases of extreme empathy, and well, I've decided to settle on one of my first experiences I had as a kid.
Okay.
You know, it sticks out as one of the most powerful moments at an early age. You know, especially before I learned how to mask, and which many autistics eventually do. Let's see. There was a movie I was watching as a kid called Toys. Not sure if anyone here has ever seen it. It's an old Robin Williams classic. It was forgotten. There was a scene near the end, essentially some context. It's a toy factory that's been taken over by a militaristic uncle. He's trying to transform it into a weapons factory, creating doing drone warfare. There was a scene in the climax where, in order to try to distract the general and his, drone army, they found all the old classic toys the company had made and essentially used them as a distraction. Wound them up and sent them forward, distracting the senses of the drone tanks and helicopters. And I remember watching as a 5 years old, which, 5-year-old watching a movie that I probably should not have watched. I miss the 90s. The sad music started playing, and all of the, toys started to get destroyed. And for the next 20 minutes, I was overwhelmed with sadness and feeling for all this, destruction going on. Remember my parents, wondering to themselves, like, yes, it's a sad scene, but come on now, it's just, it's, I thought I might have, taking things a bit too far, but for me, it just overwhelming sense of sadness for what was going on at that moment, which some family members still make fun of me today for that, but that's never here nor there. But that is like and looking back, it seems like an odd thing to feel such intense, empathy for, but that's just how I was functioning at the time. And look, rewatching it is a fairly sad scene. Yes. I see your hand up, Nicola.
Yeah, I was going to say that that's the one time that I often lose my ability to control my emotions when I'm watching movies. And I've got one friend that won't go to a sad movie with me because they know that if I get really into the film, I forget to mask and I get so into what the characters are feeling. I went to see Les Mis and I started sobbing so much in some of the sad parts of the movie that people started looking, and this is why she doesn't come with me anymore. And she said she was, I was in the community, and she was caring for me. So, which was it was in a jokey way. It wasn't like a cruel thing to do, just because I was being ridiculously hyper emotional. But I don't know whether anybody else has that you kind of have that in movies where you almost, it gets past your filter of protection, that with this picture that Philip put up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Yeah, same. Like when I was a kid, that's all I did. Like my friends were the like film characters, like that's why all my tattoos are film references, because there is that connection. You can just watch them and rewatch them on their journeys, and you live them 1,000 times with them. And it's just like, yeah, the best thing for an autistic person, isn't it? Yeah, films are great.
Yep.
So yeah, basically, even at an early age, I was, connecting with characters, or even in this case, inanimate objects in a movie that just brought me to tears.
Yes, I know how you mean. One of the shows that draws a lot of emotion from me happens to be Downton Abbey. Oh my gosh, does that wrench emotions? The one where Lady Sybil passes away, oh my gosh, I can't control it. That's just one of those things. And the moments of what I call reconciliation in the movie, where people reconcile, like the one at the end of season 5 when Lord Grantham finally tells Edith that he knows about Marigold, and just that exchange is so powerful, so wonderfully powerful. So I know exactly what you mean. So Scott, go ahead.
So the example that I'd like to share is actually a part of the story of me learning that I am autistic. I found out formally that I'm autistic when I was 48, almost 3 years ago. And it came about 6 months earlier. My wife and I were watching this show called The Employables on A&E. And it was a reality show that follows neurodivergent people as they try to enter the workplace. Various ages, various backgrounds, autism, Tourette's, and some others. And every time they spotlighted an autistic person, I just felt this overwhelming connection. I was like, this could be me. I totally get it. But at that point, I didn't understand why. That did drive me to learn more about autism, take some online quizzes, and it really got me questioning. I went through the stages to be formally identified, and that just brought everything full circle, and which is kind of another one of those empathy moments for me as well. Being able to reconnect with the people that I saw on TV and knowing, yes, this is me, and it explains so much. But when I would see them on TV, like I said, it could have been me on the screen, and I just felt everything they felt with every fiber of my being. And there are times, kind of like starting right now, I just felt this overwhelming urge to cry, but a happy cry, because I understood what they were experiencing.
Yeah, those are some really great examples. I have a few stories of my own to tell here. I tend to feel a great amount of empathy when someone who is really close to another passes away. Death and grief has followed my life significantly through my life. Without going into details why it happened, how it happened, and everything like that, I'll just share. For me, one of the most tragic deaths that happened is my father and I were estranged for the last 5 years of his life, and it's just one of those things that it just, I can't explain the details. But what I will say is that on the 13th of May, year 2000, I learned that my father, had died on the 10th, was buried on the 12th. It appeared in the obituary the day after. And so my mother contacted me to tell me about it. And long story short, but my sister and I, we were not even named. We were disinherited everything. So that was a tremendous year, a year of tremendous pain, a tremendous grief that year. And that experience followed me for a good 5-6 years before I started to feel like I can finally move along a little bit. So I've learned a lot about grief over my time. So when I hear of someone who's lost somebody really close to them, I can feel that loss with them. In 2015, the 22nd of November, 2015, my mother passed away, and my mother and I were very close. So, and I really worked through my grief that year. So I know certain things about grief, and I really feel grief when it occurs. I feel it. I can empathize with it. I know how difficult that is, to the point where I will be the one who will advocate for, if somebody's feeling a deep loss because of someone who has passed away, a relationship that has broken up, or even I had one in which this autistic person was grieving that their service animal had passed away, and they were punishing themselves for feeling that way. I said, for crying out loud, no, don't do that. I said, your service animal probably knows your soul better than you do. Of course, it's going to hurt, deeply. And I'm one of those people who will tell people, don't ever tell anybody grieving a loss that someday you'll get over this, because quite frankly, you don't know that. And it is very cruel. So don't ever do that. So when it comes to empathy, that's an example of, to me, where I can feel the double empathy. I can really feel it in my gut. It's just there, and I can feel it. So those are all great examples, and I'm grateful for all of you sharing your stories. Now I have a few other questions that we can talk about here that I know I sent to you all, but what are some things that you do when you feel empathy? what are some things you do? Do you spend time alone? Do you spend time with people? Do you tend to fidget or stim more, do you think? You know, do you tend to, like I say, do you tend to want to really socialize or just withdraw completely? And I mean, if you've got other examples of things you do, by all means, let's talk about them. But I want to give everybody, all the panelists, an opportunity to say, when you feel empathy, you might even say how you know that, if you want to. Answer these questions in a way that's comfortable for you. So let's start backwards. Let's start with Scott and go backwards to Nicola this time.
That's an interesting question. And I'm sitting here trying to think about whether or not feeling empathy is a distinct and discrete moment in time, or moments plural in time, or if it's just something that we're always in a state of in some various level or another, just like any other human would do. I don't know that it's any one point in time, at least not for me. But I know when I do feel really strongly, what others may be feeling, or having this really powerful emotional reaction, whether it's positive or negative, kind of depending on what it is. I may want to tell the world about it, and I've got to talk to somebody. I've got to share my thoughts, interact with people. And then other times I just got to be alone. Go to a room where I can turn off the lights, have it cold and dark and quiet, and just be able to recharge my batteries. But in both those situations, it could be something that's a really positive empathic moment, or a really negative empathic moment.
Those are good points. Positive and negative empathy moments. That's a new one for me. Good. I'm glad you brought it up. Robert, go ahead.
Thank you.
Forgot I had myself on mute. Let's see. During my intense moments, my go-to method is to hop in my car and drive around. Being of a self-contained space and driving, it helps me regulate. Is that the right term? Regulate. Essentially, I just need some time alone. Driving around helps me. What's the right term? I want to diffuse, or just get myself back to equilibrium. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think empathy is one of those things that it's not just a single emotion. You can be happy, sad, angry, just it could be any emotion, and somehow it's doing something. But I hear you. Anna, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I quite identify with everything you guys have said till now. I feel like Scott, it depends. Sometimes I feel like I need to be there with the person that I'm feeling empathy for and support them. And that's where I want to be. Therefore, I want to be around other people. But sometimes their emotions get so much and they overwhelm me to a point that I need to be more by myself. I wouldn't say completely by myself, just because I do have my support animals that I depend on a lot. So that's what tends to help me quite a lot. I just spend time in a dark room with my animals. So yeah, I would say that's the main thing I do, though.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Nicola? Go ahead.
So with me it varies. I mean, sometimes I just can't control the overwhelm, but other times I'm almost able to stand back and say, is this useful? Which sounds crazy, but yeah, sometimes I kind of go, well, this is an emotion, but is it serving a purpose for me or for the person that I'm empathizing about? So for example, I was deeply impacted by the things happening in the Ukraine. And again, I looked at that and said, well, this is just impacting me and impacting me. And it's not actually helping. It's just something that's impacting me. And so what I did was I decided I would help. So I set up some funding, and then I stopped looking at those things because it wasn't doing any good to the people that were actually in Ukraine. So I thought, well, I'll do good instead, and then not have this impact. And that doesn't mean that I completely on seeing what's happening, but I chose to not have that. I suppose when I can't control it, then I have a lovely doggo that like Anna, I find will just help me reduce that. And what I love about some of the things I've been doing is discovering that there are things that you can do to literally alter your mind state, like breathing, like the triple smile thing. Have you ever done that? That's an amazing technique which works. You know how actors fall in love with their co-stars because the brain can't tell fake from real, and you can just smile 3 times, just like that. And even if it's fake, it actually makes you slightly more elevated in terms of the transmitters going around your brain. And that's what it does when you have an emotional support animal, that the stroking changes your brain chemistry. So I think I suppose I went a bit scientific and went over time started to look at those sorts of emotions that I know overwhelm me and go, I don't mind being overwhelmed if it's providing a service. But if it isn't providing a service, either because it's making me do something helpful or because it's something that lets me process something, then I tend to go, do I need this? Is it just indulging something? And so I think I do that. And I think that's been really beneficial to me. Not everybody is at a stage where they can do that, and some people will never be at that stage. But I think I've worked really, really hard and done a lot of self-hypnosis techniques and a lot of work on this. And I do find it immensely valuable to try and be able to step back from some of the emotions that derail my thought process. And those are some of the techniques I use. So I think that's my one question I often ask myself: is this feeling, however I'm experiencing it, serving me or the other person in some way? And if it isn't, then my job is to go, okay, but how fast can I reduce it or reduce its impact?
I think I'm gonna just make a few comments here and then ask one particular question to both Nicola and Anna, because there's one element here that isn't just an autistic element with empathy, especially where empathy for many means emotion. And that is one thing. There is somewhat still an expectation upon men in this day and age that somehow expressing empathy isn't exactly masculine. Okay, there's a little bit of a gender stereotype involved with that, which I say is just utter nonsense. Being, I had a spiritual director who once said the only reason nonsense gets believed is because of how easily nonsense gets believed. Anyway, that sort of thing. But Nicola and Anna, there's something that I'm wondering a little bit about with empathy, especially that kind of thing. I mentioned Downton Abbey earlier, but there's one thing about there that catches me every now and then is the comment about someone from England being sentimental. And so I'm wondering if there's anything to empathy being attached to someone being sentimental, and therefore that's may not be exactly a reaction that's I don't know, somehow proper. If maybe those are terrible words to use. If I'm totally off, please, both either one of you can tell me I'm way off. Go ahead. So
I'm just going to say one thing, Philip,
okay.
and that is when I look at the home programs in the UK, there are more home programs in America devoted to finding other people's junk and saving it than there is ever been in the UK. So if I was going to rank sentimentality on a scale of 1 to 10, I think that this is another area that the US may have us beat. I'm just going to leave that there.
That's fine. It was just one of those things that I kept hearing, and so it did make me wonder. And I know the thing is the media likes to what's the word, exaggerate things anyway, because that's part of their getting their eyeballs, as Nicola and I spoke about well over a year ago. Go ahead, Anna. Were you going to say anything to that, Anna, or no?
Yeah, I agree with Nicola, to be fair. It's one of those things. I think it's a bit of a stereotype, but
Yeah. Okay.
but like people in the UK just tend to be seen as quite cold, but I'm not sure I agree with that, especially like the younger generation. I quite like feelings and speaking about those, but I didn't when I was younger. So I guess it's like Nicola says, it's a journey, it's something that you do learn. And yeah, I do agree with the men part, but it doesn't need to be permanent. Like my partner, he's not autistic, he has ADHD, but he didn't know how to cry before he met me, and that's something we worked on. And we've been together for almost 4 years, and now he cries when he needs to cry, and he talks about his feelings, and he's comfortable doing it. So it is something that, again, if you have someone that you feel comfortable with, you have a connection, a partner, a parent, a therapist, a mentor, whatever it is, then you can learn to show those your true emotions. I like to call it your like most authentic self, you know. So yeah, I guess that's what needs to go.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I would add, Philip, that there are two things that I think let people think that way. So one is that sometimes there's a blurred edge between somebody who loves the history of something,
right,
the feeling of touching history, which I think is really strong in the autistic community and for many other communities as well. But that whole concept of anchoring yourself in the past and present, and maybe that connectedness thing, which is how we think, may make us more likely to feel to want to be grounded both in the past and the future and the present. You know, that connectedness would make us move towards that. So I think that would be that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start with Robert on this, and then we'll go Robert, Scott, Anna, and Nicola. Let's go that way. But do you think that there are things that autistics have more empathy about than neurotypicals do?
This is a...
I know. It's my job to ask deep question, so go ahead. You can say it all you like.
I think it's that we have a potential to feel stronger empathy. If empathy should be a universal common human feeling. Thinking for us, it can come off as more powerful at times, which can put off some people. So I think that we're both capable of, I think we just feel empathy, we can just feel empathy more than a neurotypical person can. And obviously, with this generalization, perhaps there are some neurotypical people who are very empathetic, which I know a few, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying is true. It goes to the the matter of the famous quote, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Each one of us is very different. Each of our experience of empathy is going to be different. There are some who, when they're feeling some kind of empathy, they're going to stim a little more than normal. There's some who are just going to retreat and binge watch their favorite show for hours. It's all going to be different. And I would also dare say that one of the other curses about, I say curses, is that, many of us have expressed our emotions in certain situations. And just like a lot of times when we express anything to do with our autistic self, we get to, oh, well, that's not really a big deal. Everybody does that. We get all those, so what? Those, well, apparently, if it's not such a big deal, they are, why are they making a big deal out of it? See, but they don't think that way. We do. So, but anyway, Scott, we want to say, what do you think about my question? Do you think there are things we feel autistics have more empathy about that maybe neurotypicals don't? What do you think?
I honestly believe it's so situational and contextual that there isn't a mutually exclusive category for one or the other. I know my wife, who is not autistic or neurodivergent, she has a lot of empathy about things that I don't, and vice versa. And at the same time, there are things that we have probably equal amounts of empathy if there is truly some empirical measure of how much empathy we have. So I don't know that it's truly something that we have more of or less of than neurotypicals. But it does make me think about Milton's work on the double empathy problem, where we just can't see the world through the other's lens, regardless of whether we're neurotypical or not, or even within our own community. We all have different experiences when it comes to how we interact and experience the world. So if there is any sort of lack of empathy, I think it's contextual and situational and really depends upon the people involved as well. I don't know if that made any sense, but I don't have all the right answers either.
You have your answers, and your answers are yours. They're not right or wrong. That's not the point of this. Isn't what's right or wrong. The point is what you think. I was once in a space where people were grieving the loss of somebody, honestly, and I wasn't feeling a thing. And they asked me, you didn't feel that? I'm like, not the way you did. So they just assumed I didn't feel anything. See?
Right.
That sort of thing. Yeah. Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, to be fair, I agree with everything that the three of you said. It really depends. We are all really different, and that's why there's a spectrum. And once again, we are on each extreme, and neurotypicals are something somewhere in the middle, and that's why they think they can understand us a tiny bit, but it's a tiny portion because they experience tiny portions of our characteristics. And it can be a law for some autistic people, it can be less for others, and it can be a law for neurotypicals, and it can be less for others. So it like completely depends who you're trying to compare. So yeah.
Yeah. Nicola, what do you think?
Oh, I'm going to go straight further. I actually do think there are certain areas that autistic people are likely to feel stronger in. There was a really good study that we were hugely maligned in, which I know we've spoken in the past about, Philip, where it was about our tendency to not support unethical things.
Oh yes, please do.
And yes, so the study basically looked at autistic versus neurotypical versus typical people, or holistic people in terms of their moral ambiguity or not. And what it basically came out with is autistic people are highly morally unambiguous. We tend to have a very developed sense of rightness. And so I think where we're more likely to feel stronger than the average person is when that is challenged on other part. When somebody has been wronged, I think we feel that very, very strongly because we can imagine what that's like. And I think that also edges then into other marginalized or outlier groups. Like I'm not trans, but I feel very strongly when I see injustices against that community, probably more strongly than I think the average person would, because I can fully feel from my experiences of feeling not accepted as I am in my neurology. And I think that would apply to lots of different groups that have that experience, but particularly with that moral unambiguity, I think that's a very autistic trait that I think we would feel stronger than the average person.
Yeah, I want you to know, I have shared that study you gave me last time with a few people who have just like, what, that sort of thing. It's not been, and for those who are wondering what it is, go back and listen to the one about the danger of medical myths, and you'll hear the story that Nicola told with regards to what she just shared. That is one of those things that just empathy. I cannot relate how much empathy I feel with that one. That's how outrageous it is. Anyway, have any of you found a way that has worked well for you of explaining to neurotypical people how you are experiencing any empathy? I mean, have any of you found something that really works that you say, okay, I've advocated? Because a lot of my work that I do through today's Autistic Moment and these Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions is about our advocacy for our autistic community. And the thing is, some of us have found really great ways to say, hey, to try to communicate what we do know about how we experience empathy. And I'm wondering if any of you might like to speak to something you may have found that works. You can go in any one order. Let's start with Scott and go backwards to Nicola.
I don't know that I've necessarily found anything that works when it comes to speaking to empathy related things, but maybe a close corollary would be speaking about support needs. And we hear conversations about that constantly, about autistics need support. And I say that to say, when it comes to that sort of thing, I get really, really, really specific about what support I need. And maybe that could be a way to talk about the empathy thing, is whether it's in the moment or sometime after the moment, be able to talk about, here is how I experienced that empathetic moment and what it means to me. And I think for me, being able to share very tangible, very specific examples, like Nicola had called out, we have very logical minds. And for me, that's something that makes logical sense. If I can provide you with the right examples and with the right details, maybe then you can understand more of how I'm experiencing the world.
A lot of this goes to what I keep saying on my podcasts, and that is, we need to tell our stories of what being autistic means for us. That's one of the ways you advocate about empathy, by telling your story of how something affected you, that sort of thing. That's important. Robert, go ahead if you like.
Yeah, there's one example I like to use. This might seem a bit weird, but are you familiar with a genre of animation called anime? And it's known for their extremely expressive and emotional reactions and faces. For me, life can be, I enjoy the genre because growing up, other people's emotions seem to be, it's like living life in an anime. Like all the emotions are heightened. With my empathy, everyone's emotions seem heightened to me. Let's see. For example, that is a good example because dealing with people who, even the ones I love, who don't quite realize what appears to be a normal expression for them, like screams, something different to me. I think they're being subtle, but I can see it. I can see through it. Or it puts me on edge. Like my grandfather always has this very stern, serious expression on his face. And he learned to lighten up around me because it always made me nervous. Even if he never meant any ill intention, it's just, it can be a bit unnerving. Mm-hmm. In my head, I'm like, what's wrong with him? Is there something wrong with him? Is there some type of inner pain, some type of issues? No, he just has, that's just the way he is. But yeah, a good example is like learning to live with people who, to me, their emotions speak louder than what they probably intend.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. Anna, go ahead.
Sure. So this is funny because when I work with autistic parents that have an autistic child, this is a lot of what I do is explain autism and different parts and characteristics of it to them. And one of the things that tends to stick and really make itself understood is this sense that I was explaining of extremes, and that autism is not the spectrum, is not this linear thing. It's a spiral, and it's a whole ball of everything. And some people, again, tend to be on the side where they try not to show as much empathy because it's quite scary. Others feel all of these feelings and they show them in various ways. A lot of the time, what looks to parents like scary ways, because there's a lot of screaming or crying or emotions they don't know how to deal with. So when you explain these extremes, and when you explain that there's ways to make their child feel more comfortable, that's when they tend to try to understand it better and try to change the environment rather than the child. So I think that's quite important.
Yeah, that's a great thing, and thank you for doing what you do with that. Nicola, go ahead.
So one of the things that I find quite frustrating is that the whole concept of us not having empathy basically comes, a lot of it, from the fact that the measures that they used were things like, look at all these faces and tell me what they're feeling. And it's like going, okay, you're a fish, climb a tree, and you can't climb the tree, oh, you must be broken as a monkey. And it's like I almost find it frustrating when people say that it's that autistic people aren't empathic, because it came from flawed research, like so many other of the junk things that we're still working through, and like so many other communities, like the LGBTQIA plus community and all the junk that they've had to work through from the flawed things that science and medicine and psychology did. So I think one of the things that I often talk about when somebody says something like that, which it's pretty foolish of them when they say that to me, but it is On what metric? And that tends to really stop people in their tracks, because they go, oh, yeah, but how are you measuring that? How? And by what metric? And they don't know. It's just something they're saying. And that, I think that really helps it go to a very different kind of conversation, which Scott probably has got some comments on.
Well, I was just going to say what you said, Nicola, really resonated with me, and why just the idea of theory of mind just grates my nerves to no end. So thank you for saying that, Nicola. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was one of those things that I was taught early on. And over these past couple of years, I've learned to say, well, our theory of mind works. We understand autistic people as autistic people understand each other. And those of you who aren't, you understand each other. So our theory of mind is you have your theory of mind and we have ours. So that's the way I kind of think about that. Nicola, did you have a chance to finish what you were talking about?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's something that I'm really glad, Philip, that you and others like you are doing this, because I'm currently doing a master's in psychology, and they are still having this junk in all of the books. And what I'm literally doing the master's just so I can write this up at the end and say, we have a huge problem because our professionals, so many of them, are spouting this to the parents and other people and then impacting people's lives. And that is deeply problematic, because from that poisoned root comes poisoned fruit. And that's what folks like us then have to deal with, because of all of the 1,001 paper cuts that we get to our self-worth and the imposter syndrome and the stuff that we have to face in the workplace and all the biases that we have to face. It often comes from the textbooks that rubber stamp people treating other people in a lessened way. So that isn't fully on topic, and I'm sorry for that, but I just think that it's something that people, if they're not aware of that in podcasts, they just need to go and pick up some textbooks and see how people are treated. And if they're not sure that the text isn't reasonable, the way I test it with people is say, okay, what if I change the word autistic to woman? What if I change the word autistic to gay person? What if I change the word autistic to black person? Now read that text and tell me that it's reasonable.
Yeah, that would depend on what country you read it in right now.
Yeah, but I'm talking the.
I know. Yeah, actually, all of you have given me a great idea. I'm going to do one of these next year about the theory of mind matter. I think we need to have a thorough discussion on that topic. But and I thank you, Nicola, for what you're saying. Among my many reasons for starting the podcast and these things right here is because when I was diagnosed 11 years ago now, there was nothing around me that I could go to, grab on, listen to, think of, and help me process things. And if what I am doing through the podcast and through these roundtable discussions is prevent one more person from having to feel like they're going through that stuff alone, I am all too happy to do that, because I just feel like I don't want anybody to really go through that again. I mean, I felt like I had no friends, nobody who understood me until I found the Autism Society of Minnesota, and they really, really changed my life. They really did. And so I want other autistics and their caregivers to hear, like, for example, the podcast I just released with Pete Warnby about the intersection of autism and ADHD. It's an absolutely fantastic conversation. And so, and as I say, it's the autistic voices that are often all too easily dismissed because of certain presumptions about us. To those of you who are watching who are autistic and you have your ways of feeling empathy, good for you. I think that it's one of those things about being autistic that we need to stress. As the quote goes, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Whether that's theory of mind, whether that's how we stim or sensory processing, it's ours. And I think we need to own that and not be ashamed to own it, okay? If there's one attitude that comes through is that somehow autistics are not somehow entitled or have the right to own their own unique self. And and I'm sure all of my panelists would say, no, that is not, we have our right to be ourselves just like anybody else does. So leave us be and stop complaining. I want to thank all the panelists that have done a great job with this topic. This has been one of those discussions again where sometimes you start a conversation and you don't know where it's going to go once it starts, and we certainly have gone many places. And so I thank my panelists for being here. The recording of this on YouTube is always going to be there. So if those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can find and watch or rewatch this anytime you like. You can always email me at todaysautisticmoment@gmail.com. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. In 2023, Today's Autistic Moment is going to focus on the strengths and achievements of autistic adults. And I want to emphasize we are not taking a journey on toxic positivity because that is gaslighting and I will not go there. And secondly, I just want to say that we have challenges, and yes, those challenges are there. We need to honor them, respect them, work through them. But there are so many of us who have shown that those challenges do not stop us from becoming the best autistic selves we can be. And I want autistic individuals who are really using those strengths, those powers, those opportunities to really come forward and impact the world, the whole world in a way, even if it's just their one corner of where they live. That's all right. And so the first Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions in 2023, it will actually be on the 22nd of 23, is I'm going to have a conversation about autistics who are successfully employed and or in professional work environments. I don't think there's enough said about people who are really achieving things in workplace environments. And we know that autistics can have a terrible time in workplaces, but there are those of us who are finding ways to do that, even if it isn't, quote, the traditional kind of employment of like, applying for a job and going for an interview and submitting resumes and everything. We just find our niche, and that's where we tend to succeed. So if anybody's interested in that, please feel free to send me an email. I just also want to say that Robert is going to be a guest in November to talk about, autistic adults are not children. We're going to talk about that terrible thing called infantilizing and why that is not. Go ahead.
So that was next week, not November.
The episode is in November. Our interview is next week.
Oh, okay.
It's okay. I do it too. The episode will be available in November. But yeah, it's just, it's a topic that needs to be discussed. All right. So therefore, I want to thank everybody again for being here. And definitely, I hope you've enjoyed the show. And please feel free to send your comments and leave your comments on the YouTube channel. And I'll look through those and that sort of thing. And so, again, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to stop the share here. And I'm going to get ready to